on YouTube. That's great. Hey guys, we're going to jump into Daniel week 4 in just a second. We're going to let a couple more people log in. If you would like to join us on Zoom, you'll have to send a text and we can send you the link in. Otherwise, you can just keep watching on YouTube. If you would like to interact during the class live and you have my cell phone number, you can certainly text me, and that'll give us your answers to your questions. And then as we continue to move forward, you guys can jump in next week on Zoom if you'd like, or just continue watching on live. So we're Daniel week 4. I'm just going to take a moment and share this link on Facebook for those that are trying. We had a couple people that were trying to find us last week and they had trouble finding us. So I'm going to share this real quick and then we'll jump into some answers. Let me bring up the gallery here and let these guys say hi to you that are out there in Zoom land. This is the class that's logged in today, and we are glad to have all of them with us. It's amazing that we can now take master classes outside and enjoy that time together. So, just give me one more second while I keep working on this. I'll take this view different. And sorry guys, I know we're doing technical stuff here in the moment. I don't necessarily want to bore you with the technical stuff. So we saw a snake today while we were river romping. If you want to go to my Instagram, you can see if you're an expert at spotting snakes. The snake is in both videos. Our guess it's a northern water snake or it was a deadly copperhead. We're not sure which one. Probably the harmless water snake. Still trying to post. Forgive me for the dead air. All right, there we go. All right, gang, how's everybody doing over there at Patty and Clark's? Yeah, doing good. Cheryl, how are you guys? How are you and Drew doing? Thumbs up there too. Josh and Tracy, welcome to Zoom land. Glad to have you. So we did have 2 homework assignments. So for those of you who are joining in, if you'd like to check out any of the other weeks of classes, you can go to the YouTube channel. You can see week 1, 2, or 3. And this is week 4. And today's homework, we always like to start off with our homework, was to read chapter 4 in Daniel and come locked and loaded with a question that you may have. And your question can come from anywhere and anything that we've covered so far. But the other assignment, and the one that we'll spend more time on as we kick off chapter 4 today, is creating what we called an application statement. So I'm excited about these application statements. And I'll review what those application statements are so that you guys can be reminded. And we may have a few of these in, from the class here in Zoom, we may not. If you're watching on YouTube and you have an application statement, just go ahead and send that to my text message, or you can comment with your application statement online. So what we're doing, let me pull some of our old graphs. What we are doing as we study the book of Daniel is, let me get to me. We're going through a Bible study method that we call, I need a producer here. Am I big on your guys' screen? No, I'm little. Test 1, 2, 3. I'm still little. Why am I little? I'm big on your screen.
I went to speaker view.
Okay. Okay. So I'm trying to get big so everyone can see my handy dandy artwork. So as we travel through the Bible, anytime you read the Bible, we're also workshopping about how to study the Bible. And so one way to study the Bible is go through this 3-step process. Every time you read the Word of God, it's living, it's alive, it's awesome. So you first look at it, that's observation. Then you think about it, that's interpretation. Then you do it, that's application. Think, do. This happens simultaneously a lot of times as you're reading. But as you look, you mark it up. As you think, you ask questions and get answers and try to find the truth principles that are there. The Bible is the Word of God and is filled with truth principles. Truth principles are true for everyone, everywhere, and every time. And then in the third step, you do it. So in James chapter 1, it says, don't just be hearers of the Word of God, but be doers also. Like a person that looks in the mirror and then doesn't do anything about it. That would be us reading the Bible without the third step. And so when we get to the third step, we do it. And so each step has an exercise. The step for number 3 is write an application statement. And it's basically giving yourself homework based on the truth that you discovered. So again, we look at the Bible island. Think, we find the truth principle that bridges the Bible island and today. And do, we concentrate on today. So when you create an application statement, we talked about this last week, has 4 parts to it: time, person, action, and measurability. So you're in it. There's a person in there. There's assignment time that you're going to get it done. It's not a vague homework assignment where you say do better. Do better has no time element to it. But tomorrow I'm going to, that has time. And then it has action. The more specific the action, the better. And then it's measurable. You can tell if you did a good job or not with your application statement. So the challenge is to take something from the book of Daniel, which so far in our 3 chapters, Daniel has been kidnapped, been taken to a new home. He didn't want to eat the king's food. Then he interprets a dream for the king. So that was chapter 2, a dream that God showed Daniel that nobody else knew and showed him the interpretation. And then in Daniel chapter 4, we have Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego who go into the fiery furnace, and a god or godlike figure walks with them through it. Great stories. Now, what do I do with that stuff? That's the point of an application statement. So how we get to the statement is we observe the story, the characters, the plot, the messages, the words that are used. We think about what the truths are there for everyone, everywhere, and every time. So with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, one of the ways you can word a truth principle is God may allow you to go through trouble, but he always walks with you through it. And so that's a truth principle, true for everyone, everywhere, and every time. When there's trouble and you're a follower of God, he goes with you through it. And we see that marked up in other parts of the Bible. So David would say, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil because you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me, even in the valley of the shadow of death. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, we believe God can save us from this fire, but if not, we still worship him. And they knew this truth that God may allow you to go through trouble, literally fire, but he'll walk with you through it. He doesn't abandon you in your times of trouble. So then that's the second step. We've identified one of many truth principles. Now, what do I do with that truth principle? Well, the application statement is our way of taking that principle and making it specific about our lives today. And so the more specific the principle, the better. The more that you brought it into the Bible island, the more that it's going to literally transform your moment. Now, it can be something that's encouraging. It can be something that's challenging. It can be something you're adding or taking away, or you're reminding yourself of. There's really millions of different kinds of application statements. It's not all like a journaling exercise or homework, for lack of a better word, but it's taking the truth and putting it into your life today in a very specific way. For every one truth, there are millions of unique applications of that truth because there's millions of unique people in millions of unique situations. And the job of the Holy Spirit is to take the truths that we read and help us apply them to our lives today. So it's a really wonderful process that you go through. Some people often talk about having trouble reading the Bible. One of the reasons we have trouble reading the Bible is because we often see it as something for them and not necessarily something just that I'm included in. When you go through these, you're always included in God's word. It comes to life. So with that being said, a little bit of a review. Does anybody in the class have an application statement that they would like to share, knowing that we're going to critique it and we're gonna not challenge the assignment, but kind of give it an academic look over about whether or not it's a good or bad or average application statement. Does anybody have one that they'd be willing to share? And of course, we know yours might be too specific to be broadcast over the internet, so we're not going to make anybody share if you don't want to, but if someone has one, it would be a good example for us to use with everybody else. Does anyone have their application statement from homework this week? Any volunteers? Going once? Going twice? All right, so we're going to repeat the assignment. So next week, when you come, we want you to have gone through the exercise of getting to the point where you write yourself an application statement based on any of the truths that are there in God's word. So one of the challenges is making sure your application statement is connected to a truth. So if I have a truth about God walking with me through hard times, I would talk about something hard or difficult, that God's presence being with me, or how I pay attention to his presence, or I see his hand, or I recognize him there. And I would give myself a very specific assignment connected to the hard time that I was going through, because that's the principle. Or a friend of mine going through a hard time, or some, again, there's 1,000 different ways to do it. So we'll jump into Daniel chapter 5. And next week, you're going to read chapter 5, come with a question locked and loaded, and then have your application statement from this week. So if you guys have your Bibles, if you're watching with us live on YouTube, welcome. We're going to jump into Daniel chapter 5 tonight on this awesome Wednesday as we continue moving forward. Daniel chapter 4. Thank you, Cheryl. Yeah, we're in 4 and I'm in 5 for next Sunday, so it's very confusing in my brain. All right, so I got a handy dandy study Bible. We talked about one of these being a great tool that you can use as you try to get questions and find answers. We're not going to read all of Daniel chapter 4 in one sitting tonight. Hopefully you've come with it already read and prepared. But if you watch branchlife.church, if you watched the message from this last Sunday, we spent a lot of time in Daniel chapter 4, verse 1, because Daniel chapter 4, verse 1 is it's a packed verse. There's a lot there. And then we have the story that unfolds. And again, there's hinges in the story where we would like to dive in and take some special notes. In the observation stage, chapter 1, verse 1, it just gives us a lot to observe. So chapter 1, verse 1 says, King Nebuchadnezzar, to all people in all languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It seemed good to me to show you signs and wonders that God Most High has done for me. And then he goes to chapter 2, how great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom. His dominion endures for generations. Let's just observe for a second the magnitude of what has happened in chapter 4, verses 1 and 2, with really the main character in the story of Daniel's book so far, which is Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar is present in all 4 chapters. Nebuchadnezzar is talked about. We see his reactions. We see his interactions. He is the person that we follow, and he's who starts chapter 4, and he's the guy with all the power in all the world. So if he can say something to all the people in the whole world, in every language that dwell in all the earth, he can do that before email, before television. So Nebuchadnezzar had that ability. So we did this Sunday, so I won't jump into this too much today, but who is King Nebuchadnezzar? Let's really figure that one out. And historically, he is a fascinating historical character, about from a fascinating time in history. The Babylonian Empire may be one of the greatest empire ever to rule the earth. And it was at its most successful point when Nebuchadnezzar was the king. And so he is the king of the world. That's who we're talking about in Daniel chapter 4, the king of the world. And so Nebuchadnezzar is the king of the world. He's the main character. And what does he say to the entire world? I need to talk to you about God Most High. So don't let that just, the most powerful person in the world was pointing to somebody more powerful to himself. And he was taking all of his resources to tell the entire world that he felt this way about God Most High. How did he get to this point? If you start at Daniel chapter 1, he did not even believe that God Most High existed. And by the time we get to chapter 4, he's telling the entire world about God Most High. He made a huge shift, and it went step by step by step by step. Chapter 4, introduced to God by Daniel and his friends. Chapter 2, he includes him as one above many gods. Nothing special, but he saw him interpret the dream, and so he must have some power. Chapter 3, he keeps people from burning in the fire. That's the guy that I'm going to tell everyone to worship, even instead of myself. So chapter 3, he invites God Most High to the most high place. And he starts using this title, God Most High. So in verse 4, verse 1, you see him use the wonders that the most high God. And if you look in your verse, it's most high is capitalized in most versions. And the reason is this is a proper name for God. It's like Josh Park, capital J, capital P. God Most High, proper name for God. And in Hebrew, it's the word Elyon, which means the one above all others. So God Most High. This is a royal term. This is an emperor recognizing that he is subject to somebody else. If there's all these other gods out there, this one is the one that's over them all. And that's the name that Nebuchadnezzar uses through the rest of chapter 4. And Daniel uses that name for God over and over again. Observation, I see this name for God repeated at least 4 times in this chapter, maybe more. So God Most High becomes the character that the main character starts talking about. And that's who he promotes. So you could just camp there forever and you could find truth principles about God being most high and worshiping him above other gods and making sure that he's in his rightful place. We said Sunday, remember what God has done for us. That's a good thing to do. And Nebuchadnezzar was doing that. And he was reminding himself and he was reminding everybody else that they were a part of God's story. So that's just chapter 1 and 2 or verses 1 and 2 of chapter 4. And that's looking and observing about the main character and looking and observing about this title about God Most High. Do you guys have, and let's just take a moment to do some interaction. What is something about Nebuchadnezzar that you've learned or that maybe you know about him that maybe we haven't shared or that you've come to appreciate about who he is? This character, Nebuchadnezzar, what's something that stuck out to you about this person that's being talked about in Daniel chapter 4, King Nebuchadnezzar? Just one at a time, just go ahead and give us what you know about him or what you appreciate about him or what you're reminded of. one of your favorite facts about King Nebuchadnezzar.
I don't think this is a good thing, but he seems quite prideful.
Yeah. When you build a giant gold statue of yourself and make everybody worship it in order to be or to be burned to death, that gives you probably a little bit of narcissism. And king of the world, literally, and he thought he was the god of the world and brought up that way. His dad was a general that took over the Babylonian Empire, and so he grew up in a very prosperous time. Really interesting backstory, but yeah, super full of himself. So then when he says this in chapter 4, when he's not promoting himself, that's a huge change. Something made him change. Yeah. Anything else about Nebuchadnezzar stick out to you guys?
Yeah, I would say he's maybe like myself sometimes, a bit of a slow learner. You know, he's got a example after example after example of the Most High God, and he just he doesn't seem to learn it, and seems to fall back on old habits, and so yeah, that he's doesn't seem to learn from his mistakes or learn his lessons the first time. So.
Right. I'm in charge. You're not in charge. I'm in charge. You're not in charge. I'm in charge. You're not in charge. Yeah. Anything else about Nebuchadnezzar that sticks out to you?
I think basically the fact that he can be taught. Some people are just unwilling to learn.
Oh, that he can be taught.
Yes.
Yeah. And especially an authoritative figure like this. What did it gain him to follow God Most High? In his eyes.
Life.
Yeah. And to accept God Most High was to accept that he was going to be torn down. Like that was what the dream had said. So yeah. I'm struck by his power, the power that this king has to build the Hanging Gardens, to multiply this city, and to be the engine behind what happens, conqueror of the known world. And this is who Daniel is interacting with. So we talk about faith in uncertain times, and God even got this guy's attention. Like nobody's out of the reach or out of hope for God. And so to see that lesson, I think for me has carried some weight to it. So let's jump into the rest of 4, and we'll look at the technical stuff here in this particular dream, talk about some of the truth principles, and release you guys for the night. So in Daniel chapter 4, after we get through verses 1 through 3, where he makes the proclamation, where we are introduced to a second dream. This is the second dream sequence in Daniel, and Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. Remember the last dream in chapter 2, it was a statue with different metals that was destroyed by a divine boulder, and Daniel interpreted it, even though Nebuchadnezzar didn't tell it to anyone, and he told him what it meant, and the head was Babylon, and there'd be other kingdoms after, yet God would destroy them all, and he would be the one who is the King of Kings, and the setter upper of kings, and the terror downer of kings. So that was chapter 2. And now in chapter 4, the dream that Nebuchadnezzar has, and he tells everybody, is he sees a tree. So basically the planet, you can see the whole planet in the picture, and then coming up from the planet is a giant tree that covers the planet. And that tree is providing shade and sustenance to the life on the planet. So it's a huge, huge tree. And then a divine messenger comes down and says, chop down the tree, and the tree gets chopped down, and it gets covered with some metal, the stump does, and the animals under it scatter. And so what does that dream mean? Now, one of the technical things that I just want to point out, and this happens a lot in the Old Testament, particularly some of the books in the New Testament, whenever there is a poem or a dream or any kind of symbolism, and these dreams are definitely symbolism, people often take it upon themselves to insert meanings into those symbols that may or may not be what those symbols mean. And so one of the challenges with scripture, particularly poetry, prophecy, and dreams, is what do the symbols represent? How do we know what they represent? The safest way to know what a symbol represents is for the Bible to tell you what the symbol represents. To read more into that can be dangerous. Sometimes then, if it's not specifically said in that passage what the symbol is or what the poem means or what the prophecy represents, then you can branch out to other parts of the Bible and see if it sheds light on it. Otherwise, we might just not know. People see all kinds of weird stuff in the Bible and they say, this is what this represents. I want us as good Bible students to say, why do you think that? Where do you get that from? And just make sure that someone's not, because I feel that way, or because this is a history lesson, or because, I don't know, it just seemed to make sense. That's super dangerous. People do that with all kinds of stories in the Bible. They'll make things symbolize things that don't, that's not what it means. That's not what it symbolizes. I heard a famous television preacher one day talk about the casting of the nets and the fish being caught in the nets in the Gospels. And then all of a sudden, this teacher went in to say, now the nets represent our love, and the fish represents the people in our lives who need our love. And when we cast our love over, and that has nothing to do with it, but all of a sudden creating out of something that's not there. So Nebuchadnezzar had this same problem. He had a dream and he didn't just want to make up a meaning. And so he turned to the guy that could interpret dreams. And so Daniel comes in and Daniel gives him a very specific interpretation of the dream from God. And so, there's some surety here that we know what this stuff, what the tree symbolizes and what it represents. So the interpretation of the dream, if you jump down to, I think verse 20 is where he starts explaining it. The tree you saw, which grew and became strong so that its tops reached the heavens, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose leaves were beautiful and its fruits were abundant, in which food for all was under the beasts of the field, shade, and whose branches the birds of the heavens lived in. That tree is you, O king. And so who's the tree? The tree is Nebuchadnezzar. You have grown and become strong. Your greatness has reached the heavens. You're the one that has dominion over the earth. And that's true. So everything we know about Nebuchadnezzar was that his kingdom was providing for everyone, and it was a very prosperous time. Verse 23. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, saying, chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of the roots and the earth, bound with the band of iron and bronze, in the tender grass of the field, and let it be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It's the decree of the Most High. So there's the word Elion again coming into it. Daniel is now using the name Most High God in this explanation of the dream. Which has come upon my Lord. You will be driven from among men. Your dwelling will be with the beasts of the field. You'll eat grass like an ox. You'll be wet in the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time will pass over to you until the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and as he commands. To leave the stump and the roots of the tree, your kingdom shall be confirmed for you from that time that you know that heaven rules. Therefore, O king, let my counsel be acceptable to you. And here's one of those places where you would want to dive in. This is one of those hinge spots. So Daniel's going to say, do you want this dream to come true or not? If you don't want this to happen, here's my advice. It's pretty good advice. He says, break off your sins by practicing righteousness and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. And so he's basically going to say, turn from your wicked ways and help people. It's not to oversimplify it, but love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. It's basically what he's going to tell them to do. Recognize that God's in control and use your power for good. And then this doesn't have to happen. That's pretty good advice for us too. It's not advice for salvation. So it's not saying that you can work your way to heaven by all of a sudden helping a lot of people, but he is giving some really sage advice. If God is most high, should our reaction be, well, break off your sins, practice righteousness, do the godly right thing, and care about helping people, showing mercy to the oppressed, caring for the poor, caring for the those that are where there's injustice in the world, and go about it. The Bible has a theme of injustice that it goes after constantly. And so as Christians, we should care about this stuff if we believe in God Most High. And so that was Daniel's advice. Now, Nebuchadnezzar hears all of this, and 12 months later, he forgot it. So basically, that's what happened. So Sunday, we said, it's good to remember what God has done. It's easy for us to forget what God has done. And so to Josh's point, Nebuchadnezzar, it happened. He just forgot. And so he's out on the balcony overlooking his kingdom. Now, don't forget, his view was probably spectacular. Remember, we mentioned he built the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. So the ziggurat of literally creating a mountain of vegetation in the middle of the city. He maybe could see that. He could see the entire landscape of Babylon. It is understandable for him to think, look what I've done. I've done a pretty good job taking care of the world. And he had done a pretty good job taking the world. He was very successful. So you can't blame the guy for walking out there and going, all right, look at this. It's going good. I'm proud of me. He didn't grow up paying attention to God Most High. This is new to him, right? But he didn't take Daniel's advice. And so immediately when he said, look what I have done, he was struck down, and the dream, which was a prophecy, came true, and he lost his senses and became like an animal for 7 seasons. I didn't do research into what the 7 seasons are. I don't know if it was 7 years or 7 cycles of the sun. It could be. Answer's probably pretty easy to get to, but a significant period of time where he was brought low, and some may say nervous breakdown, some may say psychotic episode, some may say sickness that he had, but he was brought down and he wasn't able to speak. He wasn't able to be reasoned with. He could only eat what was put in front of him, and he kind of went crazy. And after 7 seasons, when he looks up to the God Most High, and once and for all recognizes that God is the one who is in control. And so you see that down in verse 34. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me, and I blessed the Most High and praised and honored him who lived forever. Now he's going to give a poem. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom endures for generation to generation. His inhabitants of the earth account as nothing, and he does in accordance to his will among the hosts of heaven and all the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, what have you done? So that poem, that'll preach. I mean, there's all kinds of truths there, but notice that he says, the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing. So if I'm the greatest in the world, I'm nothing. So he figured it out, like kind of our rightful place in the pecking order of things. And at the same time, in verse 36, my reason returned to me, and for the glory of my kingdom, my majesty and my splendor returned to me. So God allowed him to return to leadership and to lead well. My counselors and my Lord sought me. I was established in my kingdom, and still more greatness was added. And historically, this is all true. His kingdom grew. And now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble. So somebody said in class, he's a proud man. He carries pride, and he thinks he's it. And he realized that, no, we need to walk humbly before our God. So that's Daniel chapter 4. Is there any questions about that content that we've gone over? Any of the preload questions you have, or anything that you guys thought of or observed as we went over just the content in that chapter?
Is
Anybody have any?
7, the title given in verse 37, is that another name of God?
In verse 37, King of heaven?
Yes.
I don't know. It's not capitalized. King is capitalized. So that may be a name of God. I'd have to look that up to know if there was. I don't have my translated Bible in front of me here. But that'd be a great one. I can give you a resource to look that stuff up if you're ever interested in digging into the original language, even if you haven't studied it. Blue Letter Bible, blueletterbible.com. You can look up any verse in the Bible, and you can hit the tools section, and that'll break out the Greek and Hebrew, and you can click on the words and get a definition of the words in English of the Greek and Hebrew that's there. I find it to be very interesting. It's a tool I'm used to and I'm familiar with, but I think anybody can go on there and look at it. And I would go right there and go to this verse and look up that title and then click on it and then be able to see what it is and how often it's been used and what it means. Blue Letter Bible. It's a great resource. Any other questions? All right, so this is the arc of Nebuchadnezzar's story. Totally pagan, king of the world who thought himself to be divine, to completely submitted and humbled, walking before God. What a transformation story. So I love that from a top point of view down. And then as you dig into the details of the story, all right, now, what are some truth principles that are here in this chapter or in this story for me? So what are some of the topics that come up that the truth principles would likely be connected to in specifically chapter 4 or in Nebuchadnezzar's story? Just shout out some of the topics that come up, some of the areas that we would most likely be looking into for truth principles. What are some topics that you see here in chapter 4? Here comes Ralph.
God's sovereignty.
Yeah, definitely. So the theme of the whole book is God's royal reign over mankind. So the sovereignty of God, he's in charge. He's calling all the shots. That's here in a big way. What other topics do you see?
He's going to keep his word.
God's going to do what he says he's going to do. Yeah, absolutely. Which gets us into the promises of God, which is an interesting set of topics. Any topics that are here? There's probably hundreds of topics when you start looking into it, but I just any that popped off the top of your head.
I saw, and maybe I'm reading into this, but God, even in the interpretation of this latest dream, was merciful in that through Daniel's plea, it was a foreshadowing of what God could do and eventually did by Nebuchadnezzar's own account at the end of this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely opportunity for grace and for mercy, for wisdom. So all of that's in here. Humility obviously comes up. Pride's a topic that we're going to see. Righteousness, godliness, justice, wealth, your view of wealth, control, lack of control. So we're starting to get into authority. Some of those kinds of topics start showing up as we're traveling through all of this. He's going to use words like dominion and generation, the will of God. So those topics will play into it. Now, question and answer, and we could question and answer all day in this arena. I think once you've observed it and you have a pretty clear understanding of this is what I see, this is what's here, I'm observing it, now I'm interpreting it. So step 2, I want to understand the meaning. The big question is, why is this here? Why do I need to know the story about Nebuchadnezzar? Why has God preserved this in his word? Why do we have this chapter? Why do we have this story? One of the big things that I don't want to miss as far as topics are concerned is you see the salvation story of one man. So you see Nebuchadnezzar going from lost to found. So salvation is a big part of this. To evangelize someone, to be a witness, to who's your one? How can I affect the lives of people around me and help people who don't believe in God, believe in God? And if anybody was hopeless, it was Nebuchadnezzar, who thought he was a god. So but yet Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were able to see even Nebuchadnezzar become a follower of God. Wow. So why is this all here? Cheryl?
I did give some thought to that, and I wondered if his Most High God title would have been, the salvation would have been more clear if he had said one true God. Because when he talks about Most High God, it still can be a pantheistic view.
Yeah, totally right. So that's why I think in Nebuchadnezzar's journey, he went from introduction to inclusion before he went to invitation. And so the moment when he invited God to be the ruler of his life wasn't till after his humble humiliation. And so probably your question, King of Heaven, if that's a name of God, has he switched his name? Now I'm curious too. Has he switched his name so that he's saying he's my king and I'm his subject? I think his attitude in the end of this, where he says, I bless, I praise, I honor the Most High God. He's moved from a place to total subjugation to Daniel's God, who's now his God. Most likely, it is possible that there could be still one of many, but he seems to be all in at this point. You know, the last idea is I've looked to the God of heaven, and he's the King of heaven, and he's who I follow now. And he says as much at the end there. Again, now I praise, extol, honor the King of heaven, for his works are right and his ways are just, and those who walk in pride he humbles. So it feels like he's totally gone into recognizing the King of heaven as his king. So yeah.
With each chapter that we've read, culminating with chapter 4's very personal lesson, it appears as if God was orchestrating things for the sake of Nebuchadnezzar, even back in chapter 1, with how close each of these lessons was getting within the king's comfort zone until it was made very personal and abrupt for the king.
Right. Even to the point where the king is held responsible now, where I've showed you I've introduced yourself to, I've been gentle till this point, right? And now it's, you should know better. And it's interesting. So Daniel, as the author of this book, is noting this very specific journey of this person. Now I'll tease you in chapter 5. So chapter 5, we learn about Nebuchadnezzar's son. So Belteshazzar is Nebuchadnezzar's son, and Nebuchadnezzar's story, this story in chapter 4, comes back in chapter 5, and Daniel tells it again and says, remember what happened to your father. and Belteshazzar knew this moment was big for his family, for the nation. And Belteshazzar doesn't do well. He doesn't learn this lesson. So that's a tease in chapter 5. So this story, this very personal story, it is even more personal now. We're talking about his son and the same lesson in chapter 5. So it's pretty incredible. Pretty incredible as far as a story is concerned, how specific and how direct this gets. We can just see it as a bunch of disjointed stories. They didn't eat vegetables. They had dreams, fiery furnace, but it's all part of one story, and that's being told. So why? Let's get to the big question then. Why do we, as in people everywhere and every time, need to know this? So of these topics, and again, if you're doing this for yourself, there's 100 different ways you could be encouraged. There's a bunch of truths here. So, we could talk about this all night, but let's just kind of zone in on whatever the Spirit's leading you in tonight. What's something that we know now, or we're reminded of, or a truth that matters for everyone, everywhere, and every time from this story? Why is chapter 4 here? Why do we need to know this? Why has God preserved it? What truth is here for us right now? So what are some things in chapter 4 that are truth? If you can say it in a truth principle, that's fine. Or if you just want to start talking out loud, I think this is here for this reason, or this is why matters to me, or why this is important. Did anything jump out at you guys?
I find it very encouraging that instead of Daniel or someone else providing the commentary in chapter 4, that it's actually Nebuchadnezzar himself, this sounds like a witness statement. Let me tell you what God did for me. Let me tell you what God did to me. I guess the truth that I could state coming from chapter 4 would be, I pray that I get the lessons that I am being shown in such a way so that the Lord does not see it fit to make it very personal and make it very very abrupt for me that I may understand his ways without having to go through the things that he did.
Yeah. So truth, we could travel through the steps really quickly, but just kind of lump them all together. There is a very real truth that God gets the attention of his children, right? So God is constantly trying to show us his presence. And sometimes it's a whisper and sometimes it's a scream, right? And sometimes it's a sunrise and sometimes it's a storm. So Nebuchadnezzar is just one of many examples in the Bible where God is saying, hey, don't forget, I'm here. And if you forget, I'm going to have to get your attention. And so now we put ourselves into that story. Does God have my attention, affection, submission, righteousness? Am I thinking of God at all? So if I'm in charge of something, what is it that I think I'm in charge of that God's actually in charge of? If I'm building something, what am I building that I think I'm building that God's actually allowing me to build or is building through me? What am I taking credit for that God's should be getting credit for? And Nebuchadnezzar made these mistakes. We don't have to make these same mistakes. So truth principles, right? God should always get the credit. God should always get the glory. I should always keep my eyes upward. I'm not really ever in charge. God's always in charge, right? So those are truth principles that we start saying. Now, if I'm going to take this principle and apply it to my life, what am I, Josh Park, in charge of? I have a family. So is it my family? Am I running it my way? Am I building it God's way? Am I living righteously and helping the oppressed? You know, those were counsel words that because I believe in God, am I doing those things? And so there's countless application statements about righteousness, about justice, about helping the oppressed, about giving God credit and glory, about recognizing his sovereignty and leadership in my family, in my work, in my church, in my fill in the blank, and not getting proud, but being humble. And that pride versus humility battle is the sub point to all of chapter 4. If God is in control, and that's the story of the whole book, chapter 4 is the reminder that we can get proud when we should really be humble. And so now I can take an application statement about my struggle with pride and the areas where I should be humble, and hope that I hear the whisper before I have to get caught in the storm, right? And that God doesn't have to get my attention through pain, but he can get my attention through so it affects, for me, it affects the way I pray. You know, help me, God, to hear you. Help me to hear your whisper. Help me to see your movement today, so that I don't have to be so that I don't have to be reminded later in a more powerful way, in a more painful way. Pride versus humility. Where I am, who I think I am in light of who God is and where God is a massive theme for this chapter. And so Ralph gets us there. So that pride versus humility, guys, go ahead, Cheryl.
Another big point for me was that I can trust that God is in charge of the authorities in my life.
Yeah. Yeah. and not just the good authorities. He's also in charge of the bad authorities, right? And so, you know, and talk about kind of culturally apropos, wherever you are on the how you think the authority is doing around the world with this stuff, they're still our God-given authority. And so how do we as Christians react to that? There's probably a humility could be a little bit more prominent than it is most of the time in most of our reactions. So another thing that I think of too in this injustice part, as far as today, let's literally talk about today. Why is it that there's now more videos, it seems like, ever of African American people being treated poorly, and just injustice happening, and it's keeps happening. And as a Christian, how do I process these videos? How do I process this information? Do I stay silent? Do I care? I mean, it's other states away. But Daniel says, show mercy to the oppressed. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, I literally today am wrestling with that as a Christian in America today, where there's a race problem, where there's people being put down because of hate, just because of the systemic prejudice that we all have, and we don't mean to have it, but we have it. How do we as Christians use our voices in an appropriate way to show mercy to the oppressed? I don't know, but I'm wrestling with that. So there's applications for that in here through all this stuff. So the homework, guys, is for you to grab your to try to wrestle at an application statement from this. And so what I want to encourage you gently to do is take one of these topics or one of these areas and kind of hone in on it. Start with a word of prayer. God, show me how to put this truth into my life. And then as a dad, as a mother, as a neighbor, as an employee or a boss or whatever area that you're building, think about who's really in control and how you're doing living in that and dealing with that and wrestling with that. And maybe there's an area in your life needs a little bit more dose of humility. What can you do about it? And give yourself an assignment. Write yourself an application statement. Time, personal, measurable action. Write that statement. The more specific it is, the better. It shouldn't be a huge paragraph. Couple, 2, 3, 4 sentences at the most, and go from there. So that's Daniel chapter 4, and Daniel chapter 5 is going to be closely related to it. As we close, I'd like to give you guys the opportunity just to give one overarching thought from anything that we talked about tonight, something that has stuck out to you, something that you're walking away with, something that you've been reminded of, encouraged by, challenged by. If it's sitting with you, that means it could be an encouragement to somebody else who's listening. So I'm going to encourage you to share one thing from tonight, and then we will be done. What's one thing you heard tonight that resonated in your spirit? We'll give everybody who's willing a chance to say something.
Just liked how God didn't give up on King Nebuchadnezzar. Like Josh said, he was a slow learner and he kept flip-flopping, but like you said, no one is out of the reach of God, and he didn't give up on him.
Good. Anybody else?
A reminder of his sovereignty.
Good. Last chance. Going once. Going twice. All right. We'll call it a night. We want to thank everyone who's joined us on YouTube, that you guys can be a part of Daniel chapter 4. We're glad you guys can join us this evening, and we hope that you guys will jump back in with us Sunday, branchlife.church, as we continue into Daniel chapter 5. Everyone's invited. And then next Wednesday, we'll follow up and we'll dive in deeper with our Daniel Master Class. So those of you that are on YouTube, guys, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And if, again, you want to be a part of the Zoom part of this, just go to branchlife.church, click on the Daniel Master Class tab. Make sure we have your email, and I'll include you in the weekly email with that link. Have a great night, guys. And